Afternoon session of the 15th day on looking at the best practices in national and state human rights institutions. We have with us in this panel three experts, three people who have worked in public life earlier and then had an opportunity to serve on what we have seen are national or state human rights institutions. And therefore, I want to welcome Dr. Shantha Sinha, who will be first, Mr. Sailesh Gandhi, who will be speaking second, and Dr. Vasanthi Devi, who we have seen at the inaugural, will be speaking third. I will do a brief introduction of each of them. I'm going to do a mischievous introduction of some people also here, but frankly, not for you. That's for ma'am. But something which was published, nothing which is not published. Yeah, people need to have some fun also in knowing people holistically. So, permit me to share the screen. Dr. Shantha Sinha was, she's here because she was also the chairperson of the NCPCR. That's what is important for us. But she's not only that. She started her work in child rights many, many years ago and founded what is known as the MV Foundation, which works at the grassroots level, operating out of Hyderabad, but covering the then Andhra Pradesh. And one of her remarkable achievements has been withdrawing over 10 lakh children from work and putting them into schools. I mean, this is very well said today after we have seen the RT, etc. But this pioneering work of many years, you will have to ask her a question about that. She has been involved in programs for elimination of child labor through universalization of elementary education in 13 districts of Andhra Pradesh, covering more than 6,000 villages in 137 mandalas. And sometimes I used to hear stories of her narrations when she used to be in the commission, telling us how her students in the hostel used to monitor officials and come to report to her about how officials behaved. She was the first chairperson of the NCPCR in 2007 and served 2 terms and laid the foundation for the NCPCR, which could have then continued based on the foundation that she had laid. I will leave a lot here to be read by you. She is the only commission in this country which appointed special representatives from civil society. I want to repeat this. The NHRC has just now appointed a handful of people whom they call special monitors. Okay, they are there. But the first person to do that was Dr. Shantha Sinha. She also covered a number of subjects when she was there related to children, including child abuse, sexual assault, corporal punishment, child labor, trafficking, etc., etc. But her uniqueness was that she was also had the courage to take the state on in asking the paramilitary forces to vacate schools in Chhattisgarh. I mean, this is unique. And conduct public hearings, which usually commissions never used to conduct at the national level. At the state level, it's another story. There is somebody else willing to tell you a story there. But at the national level, we never had public hearings of the type that was organized by the NCPCR, and particularly she did it in the area of right to education. She's also a teacher, professor, head of the department in the Department of Political Science, teaches courses on India's development and democracy in Andhra Pradesh, members of various committees, and she was a member of the National Advisory Committee of the Institute of Human Rights Education when Dr. Vasanthi Devi was the chair of the Institute of Human Rights Education. Lots of more stories to tell you, but I will withhold all those stories, hand you over to Dr. Shantha Sinha for her narration of her valuable experience as the first chairperson of the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights. She is not a judge, she is not a male member, and she is not an IAS officer. Yet she was a very efficient chairperson. With those words, over to you, Dr. Shantha Sinha, because people believe in this country you need to be IAS, you need to be a man, or you need to be this judge, all of which you are not. So let them know what you are really. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Henry, for such a flowery introduction. It takes me really back to 10 years ago when I was in the commission as its chair. And, since you have already covered much of what the commission role is, I thought I will spend some time on just narrating some stories, as I mentioned to you earlier, to tell you what the challenges are of a person who's not an IAS, of a person who's a woman, and of a person who believes very strongly in non-hierarchical structures and in democratic structures and wants to practice that even in a very hierarchical system that our bureaucracy is. So I will start on the challenges that one has faced, and I will start with just one thing that I had learned, which again you had mentioned, which I forgot completely, is the value of the green paper. See, when you are in the civil society space, whatever you write as notes or as indications or letters to anyone, you don't care whether it is officially acceptable or not, as long as you made your points. I found out within 2 or 3 months that my officials would take my words seriously only when I noted whatever one had to say on a green paper. And I found that if anybody is going to join government, insist on writing whatever you have to say, your notes on a green paper, and that is what gives it a stamp of legitimacy. This is on a light note. First of all, I think I started with uh, a very clear view on what child rights are in the country. I mean, what is the definition? What are we trying to do? You know, and here, to me, I made it very clear in the commission and also wherever I spoke that when we're talking about children's rights, we are talking about inalienable rights which are enshrined in the constitution, and the right all rights were equally important. This has happened. I had to make it many times known, because even among civil society, those who worked on, say, right to food and rights of children below 6 years of age would think that I'm not paying enough attention to them. And there are some who worked on child labor and thought that why am I not talking about child labor? Why am I talking about children below 6? Or there would be those who worked on child trafficking, or there were some who worked on adolescent children. So, I had to clearly establish that if you are in a commission and if you are there to protect the rights of children who are 420 million at that time, then you will have to talk of all rights of children. No right takes priority over the other right. Each right is interdependent, and let us not fall into the trap of rights being seen as if they were in conflict with one another. We have to look at all of them as one whole. And I think that was my guiding principle all through. And the other thing is, there were always arguments that it is tradition, it is culture. So I would say that yes, every society requires tradition, every society requires culture, but they are not static. They are dynamic, and we'll have to keep changing traditions. We'll have to keep changing cultures to see that children enjoy their rights. And new traditions, new imaginations will always have to take place over old traditions and old cultures. So this was the second thing which I thought was very important when I set on. And the third was that many have said to me in the government that this is not practical. What you're suggesting cannot happen. The issue of practicality came all through my career. A bureaucrat from a smallest level to the chief secretary and the cabinet secretary told me that I was being very impractical. And I would say that we have to define whose practicality we are talking about. Is it practical for a child to be hungry? Is it practical for a child to be trafficked? Is it, so we are looking at any practicality from the point of view of the child. It cannot be on from the point of view of what your capacity is to deliver services. If you look at the child who is hungry, it's impossible to tell that child that, look, we are not ready for you. It's not practical. It's just not done. So this was the framework in which I think one looked at any issue that came up in the commission. Now, when we started the commission, it was in 2007, nobody had a clue about what the National Commission for Protection of Child Rights was. And that itself was a big challenge. So one would have to look at how to give publicity. You know, when there was, say, right to information, there was so much of hype in the press. People knew about MKSS, people knew about drafting of the RTI Act, and there was generally, it was on the mainstream agenda, but children's agenda, and certainly not NCPCR, they were never in the headlines or in the mainstream. It was nowhere in the discourse. So one important thing one thought one had to do was at least make it visible, make people know that there is something called a commission. And that is why one had to do a lot of state visits, you know, and it's so important that and also this is where one would partner with one's own strength. I had strength and networks with NGOs. I wouldn't know all NGOs, but certainly I had to map out all those who were credible, had compassion, were working with a lot of dedication, and we had to identify friends in the civil society to help me establish the commission. And that couldn't have been as a personal one-on-one relationship that one would have, but it had to be institutionalized. Nothing could be more dangerous than working as an individual and not institutionalizing it. And that is where what Henry had just mentioned, we had to really visualize and conceptualize a role for a state representative and say that from each state, especially if states are larger, you have more than 2 representatives, but on the whole, handpick the state and see that, handpick the state representatives, partner with them, ask them what is it that we can work on together with, and that's how get the commission to be known, and also get the commission to be known as a very credible organization. These were not easy. Let me tell you, they were wrought with difficulties. Who in the government would like to look at civil society partners as equal partners? And one has fought it all the time, that you have individual government officers helping you. All of us have had experience of remarkable IAS officers who would do us a favor. But here we are not asking for a favor. No, NCPCR should not be working like the bureaucrat who gave you a favor, but it has to be given, working in a way that you institutionalize a relationship. Neither one is doing a favor to the civil society, nor is the civil society doing a favor to the commission, but how do we work as equal partners and how do we institutionalize it? This was not smooth going. I will not talk to you much about it, but I think I had the greatest of difficulties in managing internally within the commission the relationship between NCPCR and the civil society. Even the ministry would not accept this kind of a relationship. Somewhere they smelt that there is something not so convenient or comfortable to the government with this kind of a partnership. But anyway, I think it paid off very well. The second issue that we did for publicity, I think this was very, very important, is that do research on every state. Now, first of all, let me tell you, nobody had a clue to what I was, what I did earlier, nothing. They thought this is some South Indian person who's come to Delhi as a heading and must have used influence to become the chairperson of the commission and is a political appointee. Now, I really don't know how this magic happened, and I've become the commission chairperson. And so how do I tell people, how do they know who I am and what my expertise are? And that was a serious handicap. And I had member secretaries who had no clue to who I was. Even if they had to make a phone call and say, so-and-so is a chairperson, she's going to be visiting. Now, they don't know anything about me, and how am I going to tell them that this is the work that I did? So I go and visit the state on a great disadvantage that they have just no clue. And sometimes they would not even been introduced by my rank. See, I have a cabinet rank, and cabinet rank is equivalent to the Minister of State. But then they would not tell them that. In fact, even I was not aware about the importance of a cabinet rank. I was only looking at the importance of the work and children's rights. That I think I should not have done. I never pulled my rank, but I thought, that will go into later. So I was not introduced properly, and I regret even now that if only I were introduced properly. If I had a letter, say from the Prime Minister or someone, sending it to the chief secretary or to the chief minister, to everyone, saying she is the commission and you will have to listen to her, that may have worked. So what did I have as strength? What I had was strong research. Before I made a state visit, I had to go and have information and knowledge much more than what those secretaries would have sitting in their cushy offices and in their, in the secretariat. Somewhere they had to know that I knew more than they did. And actually, which is true, I knew more than they did. I had contacts with everybody, most of those who were playing on the ground. Say, for example, I took up the issue of children working on cotton seed farms in Rajasthan, who were going from Dungarpur to in Rajasthan, sorry, to Gujarat. And I have worked on the cottonseed girls and their exploitation for even before I joined commission, for the last past 10 years. And through my MB Foundation, we also participated in shareholders conferences to raise questions about Unilever and Monsanto and Bayer and Syngenta employing girls on the field. So none of them had an idea that I would have known all this. So in a way, they were caught on a wrong foot because they underestimated how much we knew about their own state and their own policies. They would always come up with a nice PowerPoint presentation on what the government was doing. And it was never about what the government was doing. It was always about what the government would want to do. At no place I had a presentation from any state talking to me about what they were doing. They were forever saying, we have in the next 2 years planned to do this. So I had to tell them, look, I don't want to listen to any of your PowerPoint presentation. So first thing I would tell them is, I don't want PowerPoint presentation. It would take away 40 minutes of my time listening to their stories of what they want to do. So I said, this is just not on. So in a way, one had to tell them, you knew better, you didn't want PowerPoint presentation, and you could be specific, and you could ask them for specific information for which they had no information. And then I followed up on this. So this, I think, was very, very important. Some of the things that I thought were, focused on, as I told you, we developed from this on to the next level of doing public hearings. And it was, I think, some of the finest of public hearings that was assisted by Henry in Tamil Nadu. And there were NGOs in the Northeast, in Karnataka, in Andhra, and practically everywhere. There were such strong cases. And in fact, I must tell you, the IHRE had developed a protocol for me on how to conduct public hearings, and that became the template. And in fact, I got it approved in the commission that this is the protocol one will have to use if you have to conduct public hearings. I don't know if they are still using the documentation that we made on what are the protocols for conducting a public hearing, but I think it was important for me at that time to institutionalize the procedures to be adopted for conducting a public hearing. So in a way, what I'm trying to tell you is that I had to do a lot of work in giving publicity to NCPCR, and so did not shy away from talking to the TV, talking to the media. And in fact, I was not so good, so articulate talking, but I thought there was at least see the face that is there, who is the commission. So I was being invited to talk. And then I was also warned by the government that, look, that in a way that I'm becoming more visible perhaps as the Minister for Women and Child Development, that why are you talking to the media, but then we were not known. Women's Commission was known, NHRC was known, but who knew Children's Commission? So if you don't use the media, how are you going to be known? But that was no argument at all. And therefore, let me tell you once, the minister, I mean, I don't know if I should share, was quite intimidated by the visibility that commission was getting at that time. Instead of saying, yes, we are with you, you know, I was invited to the UN General Assembly to be on a panel with Hillary Clinton. There were just two of us to be on the panel. And the minister didn't let me go. And in the government, there is this procedure that the ministry has to give you permission to leave the country. I don't even know why this ridiculous procedure is. And here I was going to show how well the country is defending children and its rights. I was a spokesperson for the minister writes to them, why don't you invite me? Why are you inviting her? So you can imagine how threatened the government ministry can feel when, even if you're low profile, even if you didn't care for publicity for yourself but for the commission, that they do feel quite threatened. And it was quite interesting. I will go into some more stories about relationship with the ministry and the commission, but basically to tell you that it's not easy. In fact, I would say that if it were easy and if it were comfortable, then something is wrong with your work. One of the best indications of a good commission is when the ministry feels uncomfortable with you. That is your job. You have to be uncomfortable, but at the same time, you don't have to take an adversarial role. At the same time, you don't have to threaten. Because you're not looking at it as persons at all. And at the same time, this tension is never a tension between the chairperson and the minister. It's a tension between two systems, and it's a structural constraint. And it need not be a constraint if we understood in all maturity that we are playing our roles to make it easy for children. But this kind of maturity was somewhere, I think, not available. I tried hard to say that we have no personal differences, but we are playing our roles, and let us play our roles properly. I think this had never happened. Now, some things that one had done other than state representatives, which was out of the box, which I thought I should mention, is that within the commission, we set up many cells. We set up, because the commission was to be monitoring children's right to education. So we said there has to be a right to education cell. And you wouldn't believe, when we began, the budget for the commission was only 11 crores. And after paying for salaries and travel, and I had left with only 1 crore to do whatever work I could. So you can imagine, even as running an NGO, I had more money in implementing a program, not in implementing, but in running the program, than being in the government. Here you have to monitor children's rights with some 2 crores, because the others say I spent 2 crores only in paying rent for the entire premises that we were occupying. Then we had to do salaries. We were left only with 2 crores. And then I wanted to do this RTE cell. So one had to work to have joint meetings with the Ministry of WCD, Ministry of HRD, and getting them to write notes and getting them to say that the Ministry of HRD should give a grant of at least 5 to 6 crores a year, till such time Women and Child Development would give a grant. So in a way, there is a compromise that can happen when there are not enough budgets, and when you have to depend on the ministry for your budgets. Every year, one will have to give a request for the government, to the government, telling them that this is the kind of amount we want, this is what we will have to spend. Please include NCPCR, raise the budget for NCPCR. Currently, the budget I have just seen for NCPCR is about 19 crores, and I'm quite happy with it, but even 19 crores is just not enough. I know much more has to be done. But basically, the dependence for funding, and it used to be very difficult, because sometimes when you had a member secretary who just would be a mole in your ministry's mole in your office, wanting to sabotage the functioning of the commission, even there was a risk of your own salaries not coming, the staff salaries not coming. Sometimes there would be a delay for 1 month or 2 months. And these kinds of frustrations, I think, should never happen. And yeah, this is just to tell you of how, but this never compromised the work that we were doing. I mean, no, nothing would have compromised the work NCPCR was doing. So we had to get funds from the Ministry of HRD for this. Then we had to take, there were several complaints about children in areas of civil unrest and their rights, being abrogated. And so we had to talk to the Ministry of Home Affairs and the Prime Minister's Relief Fund, and got again a handsome grant of some 3 crores to protect rights of children in areas of conflict. And we started a program called the Bal Bandhu program. I think this also happened because of one's training in forever making project proposals and forever seeking funds and for ever getting grant. I do not know if you didn't have an NGO framework, you would have ever thought of taking money from one government to the other. But I was very clear that one must never take funds from UNICEF. One must never take funds from ILO. One must never take funds from Plan India or Save the Children. They would have been very happy if the commission took funds. But then if you took funds from them, then you would have to be accountable to them. And I felt that that is a huge compromise. It is okay to get funds from any other department of the government, but certainly not from any, they would be ready to pay for your interns. They would be ready to have a person in your office whose salary will be paid. But then we felt that that is a huge compromise and that cannot be allowed. Now, I want to talk, I do not know how much time I have. Henry, are you following me? Anyway, I want to tell you about
I only muted. You have another
5 minutes. So I'll quickly tell you about 2 things that I did apart from making the cells in the commission. I'm sure they're all functioning well even now. And we also went out of the way to work in Jammu and Kashmir. The commission does not allow, there's no Jammu and Kashmir, they are protected under their own constitution. So the Commission Act does not prevail in Jammu and Kashmir. So one had to work with the Home Ministry. Gopal Pillai was the secretary then, with the Home Minister Chidambaram. One had to work with Omar Abdullah, who was the chief minister. One had to work with the chief secretary there. One had to work with the Prime Minister's office to show that, look, this is what is happening in Kashmir and MCPCR should be allowed to work there. After 2 years of engagement and negotiations with them, NCPCR was allowed to work in Kashmir, which I think was a huge learning that you can, within the system, if you're honest, work and bring all of them together on the same page, the state government, the central government. And I think this exercise was a huge exercise in learning. I won't go into that. One other thing I would say and stop, we were involved in drafting of many laws, but I think I should tell you about the drafting of POXO, which all of us are talking about. For 6 months, I had no members in the commission. There was only me as a chairperson in the second term. That is when I found that the government was coming up with a comprehensive act of including all rights of children, like child labor, child trafficking, sexual abuse, violence, corporal punishment, everything, and making an omnibus law. I felt that that is simply not on, and especially the Women and Child Department had talked about sexual violence and abuse in a huge report, so it should have its own, a separate law. And when I mentioned it, they were not taking it seriously. They thought I was opposing them. So I had to write a letter to the Prime Minister. I had to write a letter to the Law Minister. I had to write a letter to Mrs. Gandhi, telling them the flaws in it. And Professor Babu Matthew helped me a lot in drafting these letters, telling me that what is a flaw in having an omnibus act. So then NCPCR was authorized to make the draft law for POXO. And for 6 months, we had worked on drafting the law. And just then, Justice Shah had retired. So he was chairing the committee that NCPCR formed. Much of what you find in the POXO Act is what NCPCR had already drafted and made a presentation to the ministry. I think this exercise was closed the cordial relationship between the commission and the ministry forever. The exercise of making drafting a law, I just thought I might tell you that that was a great experience that I have had, and all the drawbacks in the law are not what commission had drafted but were changed by the ministry, like criminalizing sexual exploration and relation of children. So this is one thing I would like to say, but ultimately one line I would say, that protecting children's rights is a moral compulsion, an ethical issue, and a political issue. It's not at all got to do with charity and say, to the children. It has got to do with the children contesting for their space in India's democracy and for their space in the resources that India has, and they have to contest with huge with the defense establishment, with so many other establishments for what is due to them. So it is actually a site for contestation. And for me, the commission was a friend of the child, which will help children in their struggle for more resources. With this, I close for now.
Thank you, Shantha. Thank you very much. We will keep the questions to the end. I will introduce Mr. Sailesh Gandhi in a minute, and then allow him to speak. Friends, Mr. Sailesh Gandhi was a member of the Central Information Committee. The first generation entrepreneur and a distinguished alumnus, awardee of IIT Bombay. He sold his company to become an RTI activist. He was part of the national RTI movement, which was involved in the drafting of the National Act. He was the convener of the National Campaign for People's Right to Information and used RTI and also trained many citizens and government officials in over 1,000 workshops to use it. The only RTI activist to have been chosen as a Central Information Commissioner, he disposed a record of 20,000 cases in 3 years and 9 months and ensured that most cases were decided in less than 90 days. Gave many landmark decisions on RTI and organized the first digital paperless office in the Commission. Passionately pursued the cause of evolving ways for a time-bound justice delivery system and improving governance systems in the Commission. Amongst many awards he has been awarded, he has been awarded the Nani Palkiwala Civil Liberties Award and the M.R. Pai Award. He has published a book, RTI Act, Authentic Interpretation of the Statute, and a paper critiquing Supreme Court judgments on RTE. We welcome you, Mr. Sailesh Gandhi. Over to you for the next 25 minutes.
Thank you very much, Henry. And I'm thankful to IHRI and Henry and his colleagues for giving me the opportunity of talking to all of you. Can you hear me, Henry? Okay. Let me begin somewhere. I've often wondered, we say India is the world's largest democracy. When I was a kid in school, I was told that democracy is rule of the people, for the people, by the people. And I don't believe that is true at all. An average citizen, when he or she goes to a government office, does not feel like the ruler of this nation. In fact, more often, the average citizen comes out feeling angry, humiliated, and frustrated. So if it's not rule of the people, for the people, by the people, how are we a democracy is a question that I often ask myself. We call ourselves a democracy because we have a reasonably fair system of elections. We are able to change governments and leaders. But the sovereignty of the individual is not taken into account. I would submit to you that unless each individual citizen feels like a sovereign, respect for the human being, we are not a democracy. We cannot have democracy without the basic function of saying respect for the individual must be there. If we are rulers of this nation, everything belongs to us. And by definition, all the information in the government belongs to each one of us. And therefore, we have a right to share that information, to get that information. That's a default mode. However, the RTI Act that India developed was one of the best laws in the world. Even now, I rate this as one of the best laws in the world. And lots of other laws that we enact are some of the best laws, though we blame the politicians and the parliamentarians for a lot of things in the country. I believe we are extraordinarily lucky in getting some of the best laws for a lot of things. However, our implementation is very poor. In the Right to Information Act, if an applicant does not get information, there is a first appellate authority and then the commission. So if there is a dispute in giving information, which is quite common, in fact, I must share that the government which brought the RTI Act in less than a year, in about 6 months to be more precise, wanted to amend the law to make it much weaker than it is today. There was a lot of public agitation and therefore this did not happen. But Shanthaji mentioned that most people who become commissioners or hold such positions come aboard by way of political patronage and or bureaucratic networking. Sifarishbazi say, based on recommendations, based on networking, based on seeking that job, they get these positions. These are powerful positions. In my opinion, these are our checks and balances of democracy. They are meant to ensure that certain things that need to be protected are protected, certain rights that are to be implemented are given to the citizens, and so on and so forth. RTI commissioners' jobs also have generally been given as a political patronage, or as I said, bureaucratic networking, or as return favors for favors done earlier to judges, bureaucrats, even civil society people who join. More often than not are those who belong to the Darbar culture of the powers that be. How did I get selected? You might wonder, and I would like to tell you this. When in 2008, Arvind Kejriwal came to know that the government had decided to appoint 4 commissioners as to the Information Commission. He called me up and said, Sailesh, we had all been saying that we want a transparent process of selection. We want people who are committed to the job and are aligned to the right to information and to democracy. So Arvind said, look, nobody's listening to us. Let's do something. Let's suggest a panel of 4. So we got a panel of 4 together and got some prominent citizens to write to the Prime Minister, the leader of the opposition at that time, L.K. Advani, and Prithviraj Chavan, the DOPT minister, saying that these are people who have got a transparency record and these should be selected. Nobody is going to listen to us really. The 4th name, the 3 other names became commissioners with me. The 4th name was of R.B. Kumar, who was DG of Gujarat at the time of the Godhra riots and who had taken a position clearly against Mr. Narendra Modi, Chief Minister of Gujarat at that time. The night before the meeting, the meetings are a farce generally, they don't discuss anything. The night before the meeting, the list was sent to Mr. Advani's residence saying we are going to sign off on this list. When he saw Mr. R.B. Srikumar's name, he got angry and he said, there is no way I will accept R.B. Srikumar as an information commissioner. You want to make Modi look small. This message went back to Mr. Chauhan. He postponed the meeting next day. And Mr. Advani casually made a comment. He said, why not one of the civil society names that have come? It was casual. He didn't know anyone. He had no specific position on this. The message went back to Mr. Chauhan. I'm not very sure out of these four whether he picked notes or did eeny, meeny, miny, mo. But somehow he landed upon my name. And Mr. Chauhan didn't know me. Nobody in Delhi knew me. That is the truth. He called up a business person in Mumbai and said, what kind of person is Sailesh Gandhi? That gentleman had also never met me, but had read about some of my work on RTI. So he said, he's a nice person. So bana do isko commissioner. That's precisely the way I became a commissioner. Most of these people are done by recommendation and they believe they owe something. And after the commission's job is over, they are looking for other jobs after this. And this is true of most commissions. Shantha ji is an exception. I was selected by a random occurrence, but there is no process, no criteria for selection. And if you select people like this, you cannot have good checks and balance of democracy. That is the real truth. And this is something which most of us do not acknowledge and say publicly. I'm saying this publicly so that people realize that we are not delivering. The Commission's main job is hearing disputes between government officers and citizens. And in that job, most people don't come out very well. One of the first things that happens is our judicial system says we can take all the time in the world. When you want a decision is not our concern. And I am a strong believer, and I was before I joined the Commission and afterwards, that citizens' life are mortal. Everybody is a mortal human being. Our lives are specific. So many years, 60 years, 70 years, 80 years, whatever. Therefore, decisions to judicial or quasi-judicial disputes must be resolved within a certain time. If you don't do that, it is no system. You exist for yourself. And therefore, I laid down, I said, most decisions by commissioners should be given in 90 days' time. When I joined the Commission, most decisions were being given after 1 year, 1.5 years, 6 months. And even today, that's the continuing trend. Most information commissioners say, we don't care when we give the decision, we give it when we will. And the judiciary also says the same thing. And this has become the prevailing culture everywhere. This has to change, and this can change very easily. Before I joined, most commissioners were disposing 1,500 to 2,000 cases per year. I started disposing 5,400. And for that, there was not enough staff because for the level of which I wanted to go. I asked for staff. They said, we can't give you more staff. Each commissioner will get the same number of staff. So I decided to employ people, calling them interns, and paid them from my salary. DOPT objected. They said, you can't do something like this. I said, show me a law which says I can't do something with my own salary. I can keep interns, I'm calling them interns, and I'm paying from my own salary, and nobody can tell me what I do with my salary. I can give it to anyone I like, the other commissioners, because we had a staff of just 9 people, including the peon and the driver. But more importantly, I would like to share with you, the government does not deliver because there is no proper system to deliver. That is the basic problem. I had put across to the other commissioners and said we must set 5,000 or 6,000 decisions per year as the annual output of each commissioner minimum. And they said we need more staff and we are not going to pay people from our own salaries, which is very fair. I suggested that the Information Commission is a fairly powerful body, and the Information Commissioners are set at a pretty high range in terms of the hierarchy and positions. So I said, let us suggest to the government that we need so much staff and we will deliver so much. And most of the commissioners said, no, that is not our job, Mr. Gandhi, government has to do it. This story I used to tell, and who was government and where is government? Government is the people who are higher up. And if they do not take responsibility and ownership for the job that they are delivering, government exists nowhere. I used to tell this story in meetings that I used to go, and one such meeting I recall, Gurcharan Das was present. So when I recounted this story, I said, it's unfortunate, nobody believes he's government. Who is government and where is government? Where is it hidden? Gurcharan Das told me, he said, Mr. Gandhi, what you're saying is very true. At one meeting at which he was present, he said the Prime Minister, then Dr. Manmohan Singh was present. And the Prime Minister said, I want to do A, B, C, D, but the government doesn't allow me to do it. The problem is, nobody is willing to take ownership. Shantha ji is an exception, but most people in government do not take ownership. They do not believe they are there to deliver. And if they have to find ways to deliver, as Shantha ji demonstrated. If that ownership is not taken, and I started by saying, if we are a democracy, you are the ruler of this nation. Most citizens also don't take ownership of the nation. They do not believe they are responsible. They blame everybody else. This is wrong, that is wrong, government is wrong, Prime Minister is wrong, Minister is like this, police are like this. In my opinion, most citizens script for about 3 to 4 hours every month about what is wrong with government and governance. We need to change that. Let us hold ourselves responsible as rulers of this nation, as people who must be respected as the rulers of this nation, sovereigns of democracy. But to do that, we've got to take the responsibility of a ruler also. We must blame ourselves if things are not correct. Try and find solutions, which is my submission. I ran the first digital office, perhaps the only digital office in the country at that time. Today also, most government departments are spending thousands of crores on digitization, which is scanning things without using the output, without using the computer way. RTI and transparency are extremely important. But this is forgotten by most people. And I would submit that more than the government, the courts are damaging the right to information. And most of us are not aware of it. We are not even aware that we are losing a right. And why is this? Because the right to information is the only instrument by which the average citizen, one citizen, can challenge the powers that be. It is changing the entire power equation of the nation. The commissions and commissioners are responsible for this. If they don't function, we are launching a new campaign currently. Right now, during this lockdown, most commissions have suspended work. They are like school children who are very happy to get a vacation. And the school children, I'm talking of those up to this level of second, third. Students above that have a greater responsibility to missing education. And I was also in the first and second. Any day there was a holiday, I was very thrilled. That's precisely the way most commissions are operating. And we are trying to persuade these commissioners and saying that, look, you can do video hearings. Video conferencing has been done by the Central Information Commission since 7 years. Most state commissions are reluctant to do that. What we are doing right now is all over the country, we are so many people. We are interacting as if we were together almost. These hearings can be held. And I am demanding that in case they do not take this opportunity to work and start delivering to citizens, we talk about no work, no pay for workers. I think commissioners, they should not be paid at all. Most of our rights can be properly regulated, properly defended. If the NHRC, I'm blaming the information commissions, but I'm also blaming a whole host of commissions that we have in this nation. National Human Rights Commission, what the hell do they think they are achieving? Do we feel our human rights index has improved? That should be the way we must look at all commissions. Right to information. Has the right to information become better Is the citizens' right being protected adequately? I believe evaluation is necessary. First, selection should be transparent. There should be a transparent process of selection in which there must be at least one public interview at which the prospective candidates say what they will deliver to citizens, what do they understand by this right, and they should be held accountable. There should be some audit of their work. There was no such system. I had asked one independent. Similarly, I used to hold 2 or 3 occasions on which I would interact with people in general. I'd called the top NGOs of Delhi and say, I'm telling you what I'm doing. What is it that is missing? If these checks and balances of democracy, as I call them, were to actually deliver to citizens, I think our democracy would be far better. And you, the citizens, have to take the responsibility of doing that. If you don't hold people responsible and accountable, we will not get accountability. And it's pointless blaming people and saying that they are not doing their jobs. Let's stop cribbing and start delivering. I've met some people who say, Mr. Gandhi, nothing will change. India में कुछ होएगा ही नहीं. कुछ नहीं होता है. People tell me I file complaints, I file representations, nothing changes. To them I say, Agaris, wherever, once a day, once a week, maybe once a month. When we go there and come out, we don't have an extra 100 rupee note in our wallet. We've not become younger, handsomer, prettier than we were when we went in there. Why do we do it? We do it as an act. In the overall scheme of things, it will make a small difference. Even in RTI, I tell people not every RTI changes it. Somebody else's effort doesn't matter. But it's an act of faith. Just go to church or religion as an act of faith. Believe that you can make that difference. And nothing.
That she has been participating in. many of them with very close friend of many Fanta as well, late Mr. Rosie Fernandez, who was the founder of the Human Rights Foundation. Number of programs. But I'm happy she did it. Because the moment she did that, it was with that training, and then I leave it to her to say, because Sailesh said how she was selected. Shantha said how she was selected. I want Vasanthi Devi to say how she was selected by J. Jayalalitha to be the chairperson of the Tamil Nadu Women's Commission. That should be the biggest secret of this evening. Don't forget, she contested.
Thank you, Henry. Now I have to plead guilty of not knowing the answer to the question you have thrown at me. Because it is one of the mysteries of life that I've not been able to solve. Because I really honestly don't know why she chose me. Because the position for which also she appointed me, that was Vice Chair of Manonguni University. Once but twice. I held the post for the government. Not only that, I had done everything to see that all the national struggle of teachers. I went to prison and I was in prison for 12 days. I don't know why she chose me. Anyway, there I was. But once, I was the chairperson of the State Commission for Women for 3 years. It was 2002 to 2005. Now you have heard the experiences of two great chairpersons at the national level. So this was at a state level. And at a state level, the State Commission for Women was a very strange creature. It did not have any of the qualifications, any of the characteristics of a commission. It was not set up by it was not a statutory body. It was not set up by an act of the legislature, as most commissions are set up, and it was set up by purely a government order. 1993, this was set up, and I came in almost 9 years after the commission was set up. So it had no statutory powers, it had no autonomy, it had no resources, it was not a full-time commission, the members were not full-time members, the members were some top-level bureaucrats and the ruling party legislative members, women, that's all. So with whom I had to work, and virtually it was a one-person commission. It was a section of the social welfare department, with a couple of staff members of the social welfare department posted there periodically. So what do I do with this kind of a commission? There are no resources, no budget. So I will, of course, at the national level, and Shantha Sinha was talking about the measly budget. I had no budget. There was nothing at all. We were all part-time members, and no other member ever came to the commission. So this is the way I had to start the commission. Many of you, those who are enrolled in this course, I'm sure many of you are here not purely to study human rights as an academic subject, but to be engaged with the issues of human rights, issues that violate the rights of the most oppressed and half of humanity, women. So when you are engaged, I'm sure you will come across the heaviest of odds. So my story is the story of someone or a commission that had to fight against the heaviest of odds with nothing at all in its favor. So that is nothing at all to support. So how did I do it? How did I survive? So this is the story I want to talk to you about. Now so the 3 years, how did these 3 years work? Now at the end of this, one indication of indicator of the effectiveness of this commission during these 3 years, perhaps, was the number of I'll just give you those figures. The year before my commission started, 2001, the number of petitions received was 110. Now in the next year, 2002, after my commission started, from 110 it increased to 295. And the next year, 2009, it increased to 568. And the last year, 2004, it increased to 800. Now, how did this big increase happen? What gave people, the battered women, the victimized women, the worst victims of a terribly patriarchal society? Now, how did these victims develop the confidence in the commission, or the other petitioners develop the confidence in this commission to start bringing their pleas to the commission? That is the story. So when so this is how you find that the commission had nothing in a small corner of a government office. It had been given 2 rooms, and there were just 3 people helping me, 3 assistants, and nothing else. So how did it work? My greatest asset, my very solid strength, was the partnership with civil society organizations, with human rights organizations, with women's organizations, with the larger People's Movement. People's Watch was one of the most solid supporters of this commission. But for organizations, NGOs like People's Watch, this commission would never have been able to take off. Henry just mentioned our great friend who's no more, Ossie Fernandez. He and his Human Rights Foundation, Henry and People's Watch, and some women's movements like All India Democratic Women's Association. So these were the one-way support I got. And my commission function all these 3 years, increased its visibility, was able to deliver justice to some extent, not fully definitely, but to some extent at least, to some of the most battered and most bruised women, and was able to bring into the open, into limelight, some of the terrible violations that were taking place. And in the case of most of a large number of these violations, well, human rights students, all of you know, the state is the biggest violator. The state itself is the biggest violator of human rights, of the marginalized, the oppressed, the women, the Dalits. When you take all of them, it is the state machinery that crushes their rights under its, that victimizes, that beats them up and throws them into prison. All these things are the routine things that happen. So when you take the cause of powerless, then automatically you come into confrontation with the state. And Shantha Sinha was talking about it, and Mr. Sailesh Gandhi was also talking about it. Now this is, I think, the inevitable lesson, the very first lesson we all learned. Those who want to be true to their job, want to deliver whatever they were appointed there for. This is the very first lesson we learned. So this is how my partnership with civil society organizations, this was my greatest strength. The minute I was appointed, Henry told you about the number of associations I had, how I had participated in public hearings, in fact-finding committees, in all kinds of activities of a number of leading, well-established, well-renowned human rights organizations and women's organizations in the state. And so, the minute I was appointed, they were all jubilant. And in fact, the news started going round. So they all have their work in different areas and all over the state. So the news started going round that the chairperson is our person. I don't know if there are a number of Tamil people here, students. I'll say just that in Tamil. ஆணையர் தலைவி நம்ம ஆடு. That is, the person who is there as the chairperson is our person. So all through the 3 years, my work was actually done by the civil society. So my first suggestion to the students of this course is that any kind of a human rights organization, whether it is human rights, child rights, women's rights, or whatever it is, without the solid, without taking the civil society groups, the people's movements into partnership, nothing at all can be achieved. So that was my very first, my latest strength. But it had its flip side, inevitably. So my closeness, my proximity to the to NGOs, this immediately evoked the suspicion and, in fact, hostility also of the powers that be, of the governmental departments, particularly of the police, because any issue that came up to me, very often the violator was the police. When the women brought their cases to me, in many cases, the first person to be blamed was a policeman. And also there were other revenue department and other governmental social welfare departments. Many of them had to be put in the dock if justice had to be given rendered to the women. So the flip side was the government started looking at my work with great suspicion and tried its best to impede this work in many ways. So overcoming all that, I had to work. Well, this does not mean that there were no good government servants, no good with supportive bureaucrats. In fact, there were a couple of bureaucrats at the very highest level who were appreciative of my work and who gave me, suggestions very, very quietly sometimes, and also lent support to my work sometimes. Now, what were the kinds of problems that came to my commission? Now, generally, it is taken that when you say a women's commission, it is issues of domestic violence, dowry, sexual harassment, rape. All these are all the issues that normally are considered to be the issues that come up before a commission. Yes, they did. These issues, no doubt, came to my commission. But more than these issues, as I said, the many kinds of their complaints were about the police department. That is, starting from their refusal to register the complaint that they take to the police station, starting from their siding with the dominant sections of the society, with the dominant castes of the society against Dalits and other women, and also even custodial violence, police violence within the police stations. So these were the issues that were quite a large in number. The very first year, I think I had 67 petitions that dealt with that complaint about the police. But I should mention here one important issue. This is a heartrending story of a Dalit woman, of a woman who belongs to even the lowest among the Dalits, and she was arrested under suspicion for a petty theft, kept in a police station, tortured for 5 days, terribly tortured, at the end of it she died. And then the police tried to dress it up as a suicide. And this case was brought to me by Henry in an overnight phone call. So the next morning I left for that police station, left for the place where the actual torture to death took place. And that is a case that went on for a long time. And we brought it out when we made all our appeals, presented all the facts to the Home Department, to the police. Nothing would be acknowledged. Then we brought it out through a public hearing. So put it in limelight before everybody. And so it became something that the state could not brush under the carpet. So this case was, after my term, it was followed up, and ultimately it went to the High Court, and the guilty policemen, they were given long years of imprisonment. So this is one of the cases. Now the procedures, I should also mention the procedures that we started adopting in this in the commission, the functioning of the commission, as after I took over. Now, one of them was to register every petition and to register every petition and send it to the concerned authorities for immediate action, for relief, for justice, for whatever it is. And then mark a copy, send a copy of our letter to the authorities, to the complainant, to the petitioner, to the victim. And we did it throughout, for every case, to every correspondence that we had with the authorities, asking, dealing with that particular issue. The copy was sent to the victim, to the complainant. So they would know what happened to their petition and whether any action is being taken up. Mr. Sailesh Gandhi was talking about RTI. Now there is no need for an RTI if you do this. This brings in total transparency. Everybody knows, every person who sent a petition knows where that petition stands. So with a copy of the commission's letter, these victims often go and approach the authorities to whom we have written and demand that, okay, the commission has asked you to do this. What has happened? So this is how we try to bring in transparency and accountability in the functioning of the commission. And I think that's one of the very important reasons why we started receiving a flood of petitions later on. Now, I told you we send these petitions to the governmental authorities. But what is the response of the authorities? Well, it varied widely. In the case of domestic violence, dowry, or such issues, very often, particularly when there were concerned collectors, they were taken up and some justice was done, some redressal was given. This happened. But when it was a case of a complaint against a state, against the police, against the state, against the failure of any governmental department, then nothing was done. No step was taken.
Ma'am?
Yes.
Can you come to the mic, ma'am? Your voice is breaking. The people are saying.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah,
Okay.
better now.
Okay. So when it involved when the guilty, the person who was complained against was a member of the police force or a member of any governmental department, then no action was taken. In spite of our number of reminders, nothing was done. And very often, when we kept pressing and when we kept approaching the highest authorities, the secretary of the department, the DGP, or anybody else, then the routine answer we got was that they had conducted an inquiry and it is a false allegation. So very clearly that when it comes to the state machinery, then it is not easy, very, very difficult for a commission also to prove that this violation had taken place. Now, what do we do beyond that? So you've got once this is the reply that we get from the authorities. How do we pursue this search for getting justice to the victim? It's very difficult, particularly when a commission like mine had no statutory powers. It became almost impossible, and so very often with a bleeding heart, I had to just consign many of the cases to the back bench and say that nothing can be done. Now, one of the important instruments that we used during the 3 years was public hearings. Now, public hearings by then was beginning to be established as an important medium through which some of the very big and glaring violations they were brought to light. Now, but the commissions were not making use of public hearing in Tamil Nadu. So we took up these public hearings in a big way and conducted, in my time, we conducted something like 8 or 9 public hearings, one on female infanticide and feticide, then Dalit women's issues, violence against women, violence of girl child rights, victims of commercial sexual exploitation, then women sanitary workers, violence against girl children in educational institutions, women victims of tsunami. So these were all the public hearings we conducted. And in the public hearings, we brought the governmental, government department officials, particularly police officials, brought them to the forum and put them in the dock. Now, how did I do this? Without any power to summon them. Now here, apart from the debt I owe to the civil society organizations, the other person to whom I owe a debt immensely is the chairperson, at that time the chairperson of the National Commission for Women, Purnima Advani. Now, immediately after my first attempt at holding a public hearing on female infanticide and feticide failed. It did not fail. Hearing itself did not fail, but the government tried to fully stop it, tried to stop authorities to come before the public hearing. When that happened, I realized that there was a big lacuna in the minimal authority I had. So I just did not have the power to summon the government officials. So what do I do? So then I contacted Purnima Advani and asked her to partner all my public hearings. I told her I plan to have a number of public hearings on some of the vital areas where women are the victims. But I don't have the power to summon some of the government officials. So what is the point in having this public hearing? So I asked her to be a partner. And my request was that National Commission and the State Commission together will conduct each of these public hearings. We will do all the work. All the cases will be collected, all the witnesses, all the documents will be prepared, the summons will be prepared. All that was needed was the National Commission should send a summons in its name. And also, Purnima Advani must be there as a member of our panel. So see, when you think about this, I had to evolve all kinds of strategies just to make this commission functional. And she was very gracious. She said, "Madam, there are so many states in this country, and for one state, you asked me to devote so much time. How do I do this?" Then she hesitated for a second, and then she said, "Okay, I will come to your first public hearing, and let me see how it goes." And then I decided. And then she came. We had 3 public hearings on 3 consecutive days. The first one was on Dalit women's issues in Virudhunagar. The second one was the violation of violence against women, where this case of this Dalit woman who was tortured to death in a police station figure. That was the second one. The third one was in Chennai. That was in Madurai. Second one. The third one was in Chennai on violence against culture. She attended all the 3. She said she would come only for the first one, but she attended all the 3, and she was terribly impressed by the way we conducted the public hearings, by the way the government officials were put in the dock, by the way they were made to answer openly, accepting their guilt. So seeing all this, she was a partner in all my public hearings. And she set it up as a model also at the national level. She called a meeting of chairpersons of women's commissions of all the states and asked me to present how I conduct public hearings. So this is how it went on. And then I had to evolve many different methods, like going to having district visits, asking the collector to collect all the cases on women, all the petitions, and bring all the concerned officials to the forum. And then also we on our part, through the civil society groups, bring all the victims there. So in 1 or 2 days, many of the cases in one place, because all the officials of different departments were there, they could be solved. So this was a very important instrument through which we were able to solve quite a few issues. There's one, I don't know how much time, I think I'm running out of time. There's one issue I really need to talk about. So this is our inquiry into women prisoners. We visited women prisons in different places in Tamil Nadu, and we discovered I discovered, I went with my legal legal cell member, Sudha Ramalingam, who was like Henry. She was also my constant companion in all my work. Now, when we went there, the conditions of women prisoners, this was unbelievably wretched. Now, the women, we also found out that that in Tamil Nadu, we had a disproportionately very high number of women prisoners. The 1/6 of all women prisoners in the whole country, they were in Tamil Nadu. While among the men prisoners, it was only 1/12 or 1/15. I don't remember that. Now, so why is it that women were being put in prison in such a large number in Tamil Nadu? And under what provisions were they being arrested? Many of them were being arrested not for any offense committed, but under preventive detention laws. Many of them were there under preventive detention laws to prevent them from committing the crime of illicit liquor brewing. And illicit liquor brewing and selling of 1 liter of liquor, because that was the only way they could feed their families. There was nothing else in their designated villages. So these were the women, and 90% of them were Dalits or the most backward communities. These were the thousands of women prisoners who were flooding Tamil Nadu's prisons. And Tamil Nadu's prisons were mourning under their fate. So I brought this out. I took up this issue, spoke everywhere in the state, took it up with all the authorities. Then ultimately, I'm very happy to say that the police department realized that this was a terrible, unforgivable part of their police record, and they became ashamed of it. And then ultimately, the month before I left, my term ended, there was the police department organized a hearing where I was called, and then the DGP made an announcement there that now we have decided, we have sent orders that women will no longer be arrested under preventive detention laws, and when preventive detention laws, and they were never presented to the court for 1 whole year. So they were languishing in the prisons for one whole year, released, and then once again brought back. So this is the way things were going. So that was stopped for good. I mean, for one thing. So that is one area. But such heart-rending stories and what we tried, what we did in each case. Some days throughout the night, I was glued to a phone. I used to sit up. So those days there were no mobile phones. We used to talk to the victims, speaking to me from different corners of the state, and also from police stations and all that. Anyway, ultimately when we ended, I'm finishing it. Now what was the balance sheet? Now we tried to take stock of what we had done in 2 years at least. Now I'll read out to you the number of petitions received and how many were disposed of. Now in 2003, we received 568 petitions, and out of them, 356 issues were either solved or closed as could not be solved, and 212 requiring further action were sent up. And then 2004, out of 850, we settled 200 issues and could not settle the rest. 650 were settled. So this is the story. So a commission that did not have any power, did not have any resources, did not even have a small office, nothing more than a tiny little office. How did we function? How did we do all this? So that is what I want the students of this course to know. So, what do you do? How can a women's commission deliver? That's a question I want to place before you. Can they provide at least a semblance of justice, relief, and protection to women, battered and bruised in a heartless patriarchal system? Well, here is my answer. If women's commissions are given full statutory powers, if there is strong political will behind it, if required infrastructure is provided, if adequate financial allocations are made, if there is no interference of political and dominant classes. And the last important one, if the chairperson and members are of deep social commitment, believing in the liberation of women and oppressed sections, with firm faith in equality and democratic values, and would not be intimidated or cowed down to state by state and social threats, then commissions can deliver. But then, how many ifs have I listed? So let us hope for a day when these ifs are realized. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. I must thank you, ma'am, for this wonderful presentation. Our participants usually stay only till 5:30, but today we have requested them like for tomorrow to stay a little longer. And therefore, may I go straight to questions if there are questions?
Yeah, maybe I can ask the one question and you all can respond. I can come to the second question. With the question,
Short responses.
yeah, because the questions
So
are
that you can take more.
so it applies to all of you. But before I get into the question, there's a specific request to Shantha ma'am that a participant is asking if you can share the copy of the draft of the POXO law that you presented to the ministry.
Let me tell you, I don't have copy of it. Everything is in the files. You apply it for it in the RTI and you'll get a copy through RTI. Unfortunately, I have some notes. If you give me your email ID, I can send you some of our notes. But all my emails have been official emails, you know. And as a matter of principle, I didn't use any of my personal email. And so I've lost all my correspondence.
But ma'am, one of their exercises for today is to send RTIs to different commissions. And maybe that particular participant has a RTI question ready already. Go ahead, Matthew. Go ahead, Matthew.
So the first question to all of you here will be, like, which I collected from various participants. How much is the government control on the commissions? Like, how much do the concerned ministries try to control the functioning or the effectiveness of the commission? I think the participant is looking at with regard to independence of the commission.
As far as the Central Commission is concerned, while I was there, I do not think the government was allowed to exercise any control over the commission.
I think what I would like to say is that if you are strong and if you have strong convictions, just as how Vasanthi Devi has shown, my God, the kinds of challenges she had to face. But if you have strong convictions, I think the issue of autonomy and independence is somewhere resolved. And in fact, if one can't be intimidated by what the ministry would constantly do, because they are the biggest violators, as again Vasanthi Devi so well said, and we are actually fighting against the way they have violated the law. So they would certainly not let you work, but that should not intimidate you if you had the cause in mind and if you had rights in mind. And I think it becomes a non-issue. And you're finally accountable to the Parliament of India, not to your ministers. I mean, that is what, I mean, at least we had that advantage of combating the controls that were exercised. But they were constant controls, let me tell you. And that should not matter at all. Actually, these are non-issues.
I would agree with what Shantha Sinha has said. And everything depends on the persons who occupy the positions, their conviction and their will and their commitment to the cause. This all matters. Well, almost in any position for that matter, it is the persons make the institutions. Are we not seeing it today from the Supreme Court downwards? So how basic rules are, not rules, obligations, basic functions either are not done or done with exemplary character. All this depends quite a bit on the person. But once again, I think Mr. Sailesh Gandhi took up that issue. How is it? Who gets appointed to what? How is it this happens? So most of the time, perhaps it is the government and the governmental powers and the dominant sections manage to put their people in crucial positions. But somehow, people like us, the three of us, we slip into it.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you very much. The second question is with regard to cooperation between the commissions and the civil society. So it was, I think, coming from what Henry's presentation yesterday. Are there any guidelines with regard to engage with civil society or collaborate with civil society on human rights issues? Or are there?
I think we had to establish the guidelines and all in the beginning on which, we had to make a panel of civil society organizations, and that had to be approved in the commission meeting. We had to, there were procedures laid down on how we vet which civil society organization. I think it's important to follow certain protocols when you are actually inviting a civil society to be partnering. If you didn't have it, there would be danger of partnering with all kinds of civil society, and considering the kind of political setup that we have, I think it would have been colored. So I'm glad that we set up protocols. We got all the partners we had approved by the commission. It was not an ad hoc decision of me as an individual, but a commission's decision on who should be and why they should be invited to be on the commission.
If I may come in here, all that I presented was about my partnership with civil society organizations. But my entire 3 years, it can be said that it is this partnership that was able to run this commissions for at all. But due diligence will have to be also taken, as Ms. Shantha Sinha said. Otherwise, there are all kinds of organizations that would not work. So, in fact, in my case, the first thing I did as soon as I took position was to call a consultative meeting with the important organizations that we all knew, whose their credentials were known. So then got their suggestions on what the commission should do. So the entire agenda of the commission for 3 years, what public hearings should be held, which areas should be taken up, what are the burning issues. All the agenda was evolved totally out of these recommendations.
At the Central Information Commission, there was no institutionalized partnering with any civil society organizations. But I personally had started a concept that any civil society organization could meet me and give me their feedback. I think that was important. We had no partnering as such, but feedback was open. My office was like an open office. Even during lunchtime, people could come in and say, "Sir, I want to tell you what you're doing is wrong." I'd listen to them and then do whatever I thought was appropriate.
Thank you. The next question here is the coordination between a national commission and a state commission, and the state commission's coordination with the national commission. So, for example, the questions have come for both Shantha ma'am and Gandhi sir, also to Vasanthi ma'am. How was the relationship between the national commission and the state commissions, and how were the coordinations done? And for Vasanthi ma'am, how as a state commission, the relationship was with the national commission?
Should I say that?
Yeah.
Yeah. I told you that there was a very close understanding between my commission and the National Commission during my 3 years. And the chairperson of the National Commission actually threw her weight behind me. And that is why a commission without statutory powers could function at all. Because what's the hold a public hearing? I can't summon any government official. I can't summon anyone at all. So if I can't summon somebody and try to establish the guilt, commission, the commissions on omissions and whatever it was done, then what's the point at all? And how are you going to deliver any justice or relief to the victims? So for this, I really needed the support of National Commission. But my state commission, after I left, after 2005, it was made a statutory body. So I think they were just waiting for me to leave. After that, it was made a statutory body. But unfortunately, it's for the others to say that even after a statutory body, it's almost an invisible body. Nobody even knows who the chairperson of the Grievance Commission is. But if a partnership can be struck between the State Commission and National Commission, in my experience, it would be very fruitful.
Yeah. See, under the Act, we are all autonomous. You know, there is no organic link between National Commission and respective state commissions, or between one state commission and the other. And for a long time, state commissions were not constituted, so we had to write frequent letters to the ministry asking for constitution of commissions. Writing to state governments that they have to constitute. And in fact, even we assisted the Supreme Court because there was a case there about constitution of state commissions and giving information that this was not happening. But in actual terms, we tried to have meetings with the state commissions. State commissions were very, very uneven. Uneven in terms of appointment, in terms of the kinds of persons who were appointed. So it was very difficult, and one had to be selective about whom to coordinate with and whom not to coordinate with. So we could never institutionalize the link between the commission and the state commission. At least I could not do it. We tried meetings on right to education, we tried meetings of sharing of experiences, but much depended on the kinds of people who were heading the state commissions. So it had to be more on a selective basis than an institutionalized basis.
Unlike the other commissions, in the case of information commissions, their primary job, a very large chunk of it is arbitration between, adjudging disputes between the government and the citizen. Now, there the roles are very clearly defined. State commissions are looking after state government bodies, whereas the central commission was looking after central government bodies. So, though theoretically there is no jurisdiction overlap at all. Informally, there would be some interactions, but that's about all. Basically, the jurisdiction is completely different, unlike the other areas.
Matthew,
Yeah. The last question to all three of you. Are there any mandated processes of evaluation of with regard to effectiveness of work, welfare of people, financial handling, been incorporated in any of the laws? Or like it's come from Sailesh Gandhi's presentation with regard to his own assessment. But is there any legal criteria for that?
Zilch.
See, we have to be accountable to the parliament, and that is the mandate. And we present annual report to the parliament, and it is supposed to be we place it before the parliament. It has to be discussed, but no time has the parliament discussed the reports that we presented. It was just approved. But otherwise, there is a very good procedure of the commissions making a report to the parliament, which has to be discussed. Questions, the evaluation will be done by the parliament. We would not want anybody to do evaluation. There is a parliament, and that is what democracy is about. And I think they should have done an evaluation, which they have not.
Commission is civil society organizations must consciously evaluate this, consciously challenge the commissions, and see when they are doing proper work or not. Where my finding is civil society organizations take great interest in getting various commissions appointed everywhere, and then they forget about it. This evaluation must be a constant effort of civil society organizations, and my charge is that we as civil society organizations are failing in this duty.
That's a very good suggestion. That's a very
Agreed,
good
agreed. Completely, yeah.
Yes.
tell me, Matthew, close?
Yes. So thank you very much.
Okay, I must appreciate all the participants for such very good questions. I'm sure The questions have been clubbed together and put in a sequence which was useful. But the last question was really good. And the last question was the reason why we had established the All India network of individuals and NGOs within India, which is assessing at the moment only the NHRC. We have not satisfied. We should move forward. And I want to strengthen what Sailesh is telling us today. Civil society is responsible. Yes, civil society, and all of you are now in civil society. You have to give me a solid kick to see that we push into other commissions. But
Very good.
But Parliament, it will be wonderful for some of you participants to see what Parliament has ever done vis-a-vis any of these commissions. By now you all know that all these commissions at the national level submit their reports to the Parliament. Has there been any discussion? That is because parliamentarians and political parties do not have any knowledge of what national human rights institutions are. And therefore,
it's the same way in the states also.
Yeah, of course. But when the Protection of Human Rights Act was amended in 2019, and we had to go to parliamentarians, my God, how difficult it was to be able to educate them. And I could see some of those who spoke, and I don't want to mention names because that will be disrespectful to people. They had our text in front of them and they had to read that text because we had to really educate them that the 2009 amendment of the Protection of Human Rights Act was a sham. But parliamentarians have to be educated. So we have on one side, yes, parliamentarians are to evaluate us, but the parliamentarians' knowledge is also equally a big zero. And there's therefore double responsibility on all of us. Having said this, let me thank the three of you on behalf of all the participants who still continue to be here for your passion. I think you have transferred today a passion for human rights in the way you expressed it in your respective lives, and how you continue to have that spirit in you in spite of all your engagements that you're all involved in. Your simplicity has touched us. Your respect for equality has touched us. And I think you are very special people who do not believe in this hierarchical management of things. And you are able to look at everybody as equal. Our problems are there. We are all caught in hierarchies. We are all wanting to be superior to somebody somewhere. And that is why we are all caught up in a mess. And I think you have given us a very strong message. Thank you very much. Friends, I want to thank all the facilitators of the earlier groups for what they have done. And from this evening, you will be into new groups. I think the WhatsApp groups have already come. You might have had all your communications for your facilitators meeting. So I want to thank all the facilitators and thank all the groups for the cooperation they gave the earlier facilitators, and seek your cooperation with the new facilitators. You will come to know perhaps another person who will facilitate and another group of people who will work with you. 2, don't forget activity number 9. Very, very interesting activity today to go to the websites of the various commissions and search for certain things. And 3rd, till activity 8, you are only supposed to submit it to the earlier facilitator. I think earlier facilitators have their reports. They will pass it on to Mr. Ganesan. So till activity 8, earlier facilitators are responsible. After 9, the new facilitators will be responsible. Tomorrow morning, friends, we will have the last day of this module, and we start with a speaker from New Zealand. Friends, she's 5.5 or almost 6 hours ahead. The former global chairperson of the Global Alliance of National Human Rights Institutions, Madam, international mechanisms. But never forget, even in the international, what Sailesh said has already happened very well. At the international level, at the Asian level, we have what is called ANI, which comes out religiously every year with an assessment of the National Human Rights Commission. I remember, I don't know whether Shantha remembers, but Shantha and Love Verma were there present for what her secretary
Sure.
for one meeting, and I was sitting in front and I was taking a lot of notes. And I think Love Verma loudly, I mean, in lighter vein, said, Henry, are you preparing an alternative report about the NCPCR? we had been aware of the reports for the NHRC. So, friends, we have that there. But I think we are on the right track. But we need more effort in this country from civil society monitoring these institutions. And you will see all the efforts that have been put at different levels towards this. Thank you, the three panelists. Thank you, participants, for extended time. You all sat
Thank you very much.
on time tomorrow for a session that we should start on time and be able to listen to a wonderful person. Once again, a woman leader who really put order into national human rights institutions. Mind you, the NHRC was not happy with her when she was the chair. I will tell you those stories later. Thank you. Thank you. Good night.